welcome to the Broology Podcast. I'm Austin, aka G.I. Joe, and I'm here with
Ryan, or as everybody at my work calls me, that fucking guy.
Alright, we got a good show coming to you today. We're going to be talking about D.B. Cooper. But first, let's get to the story of the week. Alright, the story of the week comes from India. An Indian woman who had left her family's home in 2010 and hadn't been seen ever since was recently found living just 500 meters from her house.
500 meters? This is America. How far is that in feet?
A little over 1,500 feet.
1,500 feet?
Something like that.
So like 2 blocks away.
Sujata's family had given up on ever finding her after she simply walked out of the house one day in 2010. Thinking she had died or was living thousands of miles away, they never even entertained the idea that she could be in the same village, let alone in walking distance from them. As it turns out, the woman was 18 at the time of her disappearance. She simply walked out of the family home into the house of her secret lover, a local man who she was convinced her parents wouldn't approve of. How they managed to keep it a secret from both of their families for over a decade is a tale fit for Bollywood.
I mean, but do we know what part of India this was? Because you got to remember, man, there's huge swaths of that country that are Muslim, right? So she might have been walking around in a hijab or whatever. So it's like family could probably... I mean, are you really going to identify someone you haven't seen in a decade by just their eyes?
That's true. The woman didn't leave any clues to why she left her family's home. It didn't carry a phone, and police really couldn't provide any assistance. Her parents then suspect a romantic affair with someone so close to them. As it takes two people to elope, there was no one else missing from the village in Kerala. Sajita. Man, these names. Every time when it's done with one of these foreign countries.
Oh, man, you should be used to it now. You got to deal with Naresh, Gotham, Anitha, which, by the way, I call her Velveeta. For the longest time, I didn't know what her real name was, so I just called her Velveeta.
Sujata was only discovered earlier this month after the 34-year-old local man, Alichavadi Raman, suddenly disappeared from his family home 3 months ago. His family notified the police. His brother Bashir... See, how come all the names can't be something simple like that?
Right.
His brother Bashir happened to notice him on the side of the road one day and managed to follow him to a house in a neighboring village. Police took the couple before a local court which allowed them to legally live together after hearing their story. Apparently, the two come from different villages and were sure their families would not approve of their love. So they decided to be together in secret. This is like some Romeo and Juliet type shit.
Hey, so like a side note on all that, you know, it could be a number of things. So like, you know, the class system is still real heavy in India, right? And unfortunately in India, their class system has more to do with the tone of your skin than it does with the money you have. So it's like if you're real pale and you're trying to get with somebody that's real dark, families might not approve of that. Like, India's still kind of a...
Racist?
Yeah, yeah.
The Sajita family had no clue that she was just 500 meters away for over a decade. Ramans reported didn't know about her presence in the home either. The young man who works as a house painter allegedly had a separate room that he kept under lock and key, so no one else could get in. Since he got angry if anyone even asked about his room, his parents never really bothered him about it. Sometimes he behaves like a mentally deranged person, would turn violent if someone tried to get into his room. The man's brother Bashir said he would even take his food in to eat. During the day, as everyone was at work, Raman and Sajita would have the house to themselves. Raman's room didn't have its own bathroom, so he had metal bars on its window sawed off when she moved in.
Well, damn.
So she could sneak out and use the toilet at night or when his parents, who worked as daily wagers, were away. She even washed and dried her clothes in the same tiny room.
Man, look, for a woman to go through all that for a dude, he had to be slinging some heavy pipe. I mean, that motherfucker.
He had to be at least rocking a foot long, man.
Oh, my God.
Sajita apparently kept herself entertained by watching a small TV with earphones on. So she's cooped up and like...
Yeah, she's just listening to her iPod. It's cool.
According to the Rahim's neighborhood, he always kept to himself, very secretive. So some of them thought he had mental issues. Apparently, eloped with his beloved 3 months ago, after his family started pursuing him about an arranged marriage. He never objected to avoid suspicion, but always avoided the subject.
That's man, look, that's absolutely insane. Like, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, we all grew up in high school listening, like, having to read Romeo and Juliet and stuff, but that's like on a whole nother level to be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna run away from home down a couple blocks down and basically live in a prison cell with some dude and just hang out and watch like Ugly Betty on my iPad all day.
I mean, hell, she's 31 now. I mean, I could understand, a teenager doing something like this, but at the time she was 18.
Yeah, she was already an adult. Who does that?
Why the hell are you going to live in your lover's parents' house whenever you of age and you can move the fuck out? I mean, I know it's different in India.
Well, look, how many stories have you heard like that here, though? I mean, trust me, it's like, poor trash is poor trash. We all do the same stupid crap.
Yeah, but hell, dude, I mean, why did it take them 11 years to finally just say, fuck it, go get married and move to their own fucking house? No. Maybe she had a fetish for being in, like, small spaces or some shit.
Hey, look, it happens, man. Wasn't that serial killer that just got found around the corner from us? Didn't one of the girls that he had locked up was there by choice? That serial killer that lived next to Gilbert, man.
Oh.
Like, I remember from the news, one of the women that they found in one of the containers was voluntarily there. She had a fetish about being held captive.
That's fucking weird, man.
People are weird, man.
We actually did a podcast on that a few months back, if you want to check out the Todd Colehead podcast. We know now that there's fucking crazy women everywhere in the world.
There are indeed crazy women everywhere in the world.
All right, Ryan, Urban Dictionary word of the week. I ain't gonna let you see what it says.
I'm ready. Give it to me.
Munging.
Munging. Okay, so if South Park has not done me dirty, there was an entire episode in like one of the first like 2 or 3 seasons where the 8th graders were giving them shit for not knowing what mung was. And if I'm not mistaken, it was supposed to be like the fluid that was accompanied afterbirth. So munging, if I had to guess, would be some nasty fucker playing around in that.
Okay, you ain't too far off. So munging, there are 4 steps to it. First step is go to a graveyard with 4 of your buddies. Step 2, dig up a fresh corpse, female, and have a gangbang. Afterwards, one of them puts their mouth over the vagina. Step 4, someone jumps on the stomach, shoots all the cum and maggots and such into the person's mouth, and they swallow it.
Oh, okay. So it's like freshman year. I got you. Yeah, it happens, man. Look, we've all been there.
I would not be surprised if there are several people who have done this.
I doubt that there's actually anyone that's ever done it. I feel like this is one of those Urban Dictionary things somebody thought up while they were really fucking stoned. But, look, we've all been there, man.
I mean, people eat people. So you gotta think, there's gotta be somebody, some sick fuck out there, out of all the millions of years, that has done some shit like this.
I feel like if somebody had done something like this, they definitely would have ended up on the evening news. Like, you got so many people out there that, like, watch cemeteries and everything else. You got a bunch of loud, drunk teenagers out there jumping up and down on a body. That's a little bit different than just going in and snatching some jewelry or something.
It could have been in, like, the Dark Ages, though, man. It don't have to be recent. They could have done some
okay, that's right.
Shit.
The French were weird. It could have been them. You're right.
Like I said earlier, the topic we're doing today is D.B. Cooper. A lot of people have heard of D.B. Cooper. He's a crazy motherfucker.
Is he though, or is he brilliant?
I mean, he's crazy in a good way. I mean, hell, if I could hop on the plane, get $200,000, well, which is going to be a lot more nowadays.
Yeah, I forget what the conversion rate on that is. I think 200,000 back in 1971. So in 1971, $200,000, you're probably looking at close to $1 million now at least.
Yeah, man,
that's not a bad haul for one day.
Hell, especially the way gas prices are nowadays, man.
Hell yeah, hell, I got it worse than anybody. I have to fill up with premium. I get bent over and done raw every time I gotta go fill up.
I spent $64 on a full tank of gas yesterday.
Fuck. You can keep all of that. I fill up for 30.
So I might be taking some ideas from Dan Cooper. No, but anyways, on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, a nondescript man calling himself Dan Cooper approached the center of Northwestern Orient Airlines in Portland, Oregon. He used cash to buy a one-way ticket on Flight 305 bound for Seattle, Washington, which was about a 30-minute flight. This began one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in FBI history.
So as a side note on that, so apparently when he got to the counter, Mr. DB, he's really only ever signed his name as Dan Cooper. And an interesting thing, and this is going to come up later if we get to talking about like who we think did it, because he supposedly wrote his name on his slip with a red pen. And now I'm not a million years old, so I wasn't walking around in 1971. But to my understanding, the only people that used red pens back then were businessmen. And it was to have the customer sign their portion of any document so that it would show up better in fax documents. So was Dan Cooper maybe a traveling businessman or a salesman of some kind? Who knows?
You know, there's actually things saying that they believe he could have even been an inside man for the CIA.
He could have been.
I mean, especially with all the stuff he knew about the flight, as we'll get later on.
Yeah, because he specifically asked the lady at the ticket counter what kind of flight it was going to be on, and specifically requested a flight on a Boeing 727. No. Which, interestingly enough, is the only aircraft in the Boeing fleet that has a retractable rear staircase. Every other airplane had to either be docked to a terminal or had a side staircase. So the man knew his planes.
Yeah. Cooper was a quiet man who appeared to be in his mid-40s, wearing a business suit with a black tie and a white shirt. He ordered a drink, which was bourbon and soda. Well, at least he had good taste.
7-Up specifically, so, you know, Pepsi Man.
Hey, at least he had good taste. While the flight was waiting to take off a short time after 3 p.m., he handed a note to the stewardess, indicating that he had a bomb in his briefcase, and he wanted the flight attendant to sit with him.
But if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't the girl he handed the note to, right? Yeah, that was some... I forget that woman's name, but it ended up being a woman named Tina, a flight attendant named Tina, that ended up sitting with him for the most of the flight, which, how much balls do you gotta have to have somebody else be handed a note about there being a bomb and being like, I volunteer. I'll go hang out with the dude.
The stunned stewardess did as she was told, opening a cheap or briefcase. Cooper showed her a glimpse of mass wires and red-colored sticks and demanded that she write down what he told her. Soon she was walking a new note to the captain of the plane that demanded 4 parachutes and $200,000, and specifically $20 bills. When the flight landed in Seattle, the hijacker exchanged the flight's 36 passengers for the money and the parachutes.
So, side note on those parachutes. So, they actually didn't have any parachutes at the terminal when they got there. That's not something they usually kept on hand in 1971. So, what the police had to end up doing was contacting a guy that ran one of the very first like recreational parachuting companies near Seattle, and the guy literally just gathered up some of the chutes that he had available. So it was 2 recreational parachutes, 1 old military parachute, and then a dummy parachute. And, you know, that's pretty sketchy that they gave him a parachute that literally was not meant to deploy. But from what I've looked up, it doesn't seem like the people, when they were gathering it up in a rush, even realized that they gave him a dummy parachute until way later.
Yeah. The thing is, they really didn't want to give him no bad parachute because there were still people on the plane and they didn't know if he would force other people to jump besides himself.
Right, yeah. You don't want to give an innocent hostage, something that's not even going to save their life if they get tossed out of a plane.
Cooper kept several of the crew members, and the plane took off again, ordered to set a course for Mexico City, somewhere between Seattle and Reno. A little after 8 p.m., the hijacker did the incredible. He jumped out the back of the airplane with a parachute and the ransom money. The pilots landed safely, but Cooper had disappeared into the night, and his ultimate fate really still remains a mystery because there's no set point on if he lived, if he died, where he went, because it's all speculation after he jumped out of the plane.
Yeah, and what's crazy about that, right, is so there's like a couple of really interesting details in how he ended up getting off of the plane. Because he took... So I mentioned before that he had the 4 parachutes, right? The 2 recreational, the 1 military, and then the dummy parachute. And he left the dummy parachute on the plane. Took the military parachute, which honestly was probably the shittiest one out of the 4 other than the dummy.
All military equipment
and
is
took
shitty.
The best possible parachute that he had, that was this bright pink recreational one, and cut it up to make a holster for the bag of money because he requested it in a suitcase so that it would be rigid and hard and he could hold on to it. But the police actually gave it to him in a duffel bag, which is unwieldy, and you don't really want to be jumping out of a plane with a big floppy duffel bag. So he took the best parachute he had and cut it up to basically build a holder for this thing before he went to jump off the plane. And then on top of that, once they got to their regular altitude, tells everybody on the plane, right? So the two stewardesses that were left and the two pilots, tells them to go back up front into the cabin. And he went to go try and open up the back door, and he couldn't figure out how to get it open. So he actually calls over the intercom system on the plane and basically tells them that he can't get the door open. So the pilots tell him, well, it's probably because we're going too fast. So they reduce speed and altitude so that he could get the door open. And one of the stewardesses actually had to go help him get the door open and then go back up front before he jumped. So there's a couple of theories that are going to come up later that plays a big role in the fact that he knew enough about the plane to know it had a staircase that he could utilize, but not enough about the plane to know how to actually open the staircase and at what kind of conditions he could even open it in.
Well, I'd actually also heard that he had told them to fly at 10,000 feet.
Exactly.
So he knew
how to jump, but he didn't know the plane.
The FBI learned of the crime during the flight and immediately opened an extensive investigation that lasted many years, calling it NORJAC for Northwest Hijacking. The investigation itself has lasted many, many years.
It was only officially closed in what, like 2006?
2011.
2011.
It was officially closed in 2011 because they said they felt like they would never truly know what happened. But then it was also opened again in 2016 because they found more evidence.
That's where I got the 6.
By the 5-year anniversary of the hijacking, they had went from 800 suspects and eliminated all of them but about 24 of them. So they never really, at that point, even 5 years later, I mean, they may have narrowed it down to 24, but they didn't know nothing about it.
So something really crazy about this entire thing is skyjackings weren't anything new by 1971. There were plenty of skyjackings. In fact, it actually happened all the time.
Yeah.
Only usually it was like Cuban nationals or just random crazy commies that wanted to get on a plane and fly to Cuba. And there's actually a lot. You can go on the internet and find all these old news reports where people are like, oh yeah, this crazy dude took over the plane. The next thing I know, we're landing in Cuba, and we got some cigars and some rum, and we got back on the plane and went home, and it was fun. And the FBI at that time, which crazy enough was still run by Hoover, right? So it's like, I mean, that dude had a 51-year career in the damn FBI. His idea was like, oh, well, we'll just throw sky marshals on every single plane. But even by 1971, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of flights in the air at any given time. Yeah. And there's no way you can staff a sky marshal on every single one of those.
Yeah.
Now, there was supposed to have been a sky marshal on Flight 305, and it got canceled at the last minute because there was a international flight going to Spain that they pulled that marshal from to put them on that flight. So this entire thing could have easily been averted had that sky marshal actually been on the flight as scheduled.
Oh, shit. Now, there's also a lot of speculation that he didn't survive the jump because the parachute he used could not be steered. So he pretty much would land wherever the parachute led him.
It was that military one is the one that he pulled from, and they don't have steering cables.
Yep. And the clothes he was wearing, the footwear he was wearing, it was really unsuitable for a safe landing. Like, you're going to land hard, you're going to land rough, especially if you can't steer. Jumping out in the middle of the night, you don't know where there's trees, you don't know where there's water.
Not to mention they're flying over mountains, and with it being the day before Thanksgiving, it's cold, it's raining, it's storming, and you're dropping into one of the most inhospitable areas of the United States. The Pacific Northwest is not conducive for human life under any circumstances, let alone in a casual business suit probably made out of polyester.
And it's pretty much where he jumped. It was straight woodlands, like trees everywhere. You gotta think how Seattle is, or pretty much anywhere from where.
Well, this
he
would have been
jumped.
over Oregon when he jumped out.
I mean, you gotta think everything around that corner of the U.S. there's a lot of trees, and at night you're not gonna see where you're going. Pretty much, he had to be some type of pro to be able to jump out and survive, especially at night. On top of that, because it's not like they had night vision back then, like not reliable night vision, at least, anyways, if any at all. So, I mean, that pretty much leaves him.
Yeah, he's left to the elements, essentially, right? So, crazily enough, so as soon as the plane lands and they get everybody off and they do all their interviews, their exit interviews with everybody, they start this manhunt. And everybody likes to think that it was like this massive manhunt, but to be completely honest, you're talking about a couple hundred, maybe federal agents, local police, and then volunteers, and they're really only covering about a 50-mile swath of Oregon, which is nothing. When you're talking about all the forested area of Oregon, Washington State, even like that section of the northern end of the Sierra Nevadas, that's a lot of land to cover. So if you're only covering 50 miles in a square, you're not really doing much. But another thing that's really interesting is the fact that they scrambled the SR-71A Blackbird not once, but twice. The amount of money that it takes just to get that spy plane off the ground is astronomical. They don't even do that for like massive manhunts for like international criminals, and they did it twice to try and find this guy. So somebody somewhere took this very personally.
Yeah. Like I said, it makes sense if he was an undercover CIA operative.
But even then, if he was an undercover CIA operative, would they have really used those kind of resources to go after someone that they knew was there? Unless he had gone rogue, a broken arrow or something.
Yeah.
But $200,000 for a broken arrow? I mean, even in 1971, it cost twice that just to get that plane off the ground.
Yeah. And then a few years later, I think it was 1980, they actually found a bag of the $20 bills that he had acquired. And
it was like $10,000 or something.
$5,800 in all.
Was it $5,800?
Yeah. And it matched the serial numbers of the ransom that he had acquired from, I guess, the police or whoever gave him the...
And that was found at a delta, right? 30 miles south of where he supposedly jumped, right? Like right near the coast?
It says it was found on a beach down the Columbia River.
Yeah, I remember seeing an interview with the little boy that found it, right? And it's adorable for the simple fact this kid's probably 10 years old. And he's in the interview, and they're like, oh, well, how do you feel about it? He's like, man, I'm just excited when all this is over and we can finally get that money. And it's like, yeah, me too, bud. I feel you.
So, as we talked about earlier, his name is Dan Cooper. Or at least his alias is Dan Cooper. Well, D.B. Cooper was actually created by the press. It was a misprint, a mistake, whatever you want to call it.
It was basically just made up for the evening news. Somebody trying to rush the story to press and to try and get on the evening news and misspoke, and it just stuck.
Yeah.
And from that point on, everybody just knew him as D.B. Cooper, even though up until that point, nobody knew him as D.B. Cooper. It was always Dan Cooper.
I mean, I think we got the basic gist of the story out of the way. You got anything else you want to add?
Outside of what we've already covered, the only thing that I can possibly think of that could be of any importance to anybody in this story might just be the fact that the area that he did jump over, even though it was remote, even though it was in the middle of nowhere, it was near a interstate bridge. So there was a road that cut through that part of the mountain chain. And so it's, as a bridge, all bridges are mandated to be lit. No. They have to have lights on them. And so if he had calculated it to jump out in that area, he actually would have had a light source to judge where he was going from. And if he knew that and had timed it the right way, that does lead a lot of credence to the fact that he might have
gotten away with it.
He might have actually survived. He might have known where he was going and what he was doing.
Yeah. And see, the biggest thing about that, whenever he jumped out, he's looking out of the plane. He can see the lights. especially if he's a trained paratrooper, or like a lot of the people that they believe did it have a lot of military background with being a paratrooper or just jumps in general. And if he had done enough jumps, especially at the height of like 10,000 feet, like the average jump, he could probably just about judge where to land, where he would land from the distance he's at if he's done it a lot. I think that's it.
Yeah. You want to start talking about maybe some possible suspects on this? Because there are some interesting characters that fall into this.
Yeah, there's two in particular that I really think it could be, which, I mean, the FBI has some that a lot of people believe that are it, but the FBI denies it. One of them is Richard Floyd McCoy. Another one is Rackstraw. Those are two of the ones that I believe have a lot of the proper training to pull off something like this.
Well, I mean, you brought up McCoy, right? So McCoy was he was a National Guardsman. He technically was in the engineering field for the Army Corps of Engineers, but he would actually volunteer to go on a lot of paratrooper training missions. So he was a experienced jumper. Yeah, he knew what he was doing, and if it had been him, it would have made sense why he chose the military pack to jump with, because that would have been what he was the most familiar with, even though that was the inferior parachute out of the bunch that he was given. But the issue with that is that family members claim that he had an alibi during that period of time, that he was actually with them for the holiday season. Even though none of that can actually be corroborated. And in addition to that, 5 months afterwards, he actually committed a very similar crime for $500,000, but was subsequently caught because his bunkmate in his reserve unit turned him in.
Yeah, and see, another thing with McCoy, he had already been through training, so he had the knowledge to pull off the jumps. He had been through explosive training. Being in the military in general, if you're working with that kind of, especially if you're jumping all the time, you're going to have the know-how to do a lot of stuff on planes. Now, you might not, that might be why he struggled with some of it, because he had some knowledge, but he didn't have all the knowledge to pull it off. One thing about his second hijacking, where he got caught, he actually asked for $500,000 this time, or that time. He was a little bit more sloppy with the second one.
Much more sloppy with the second one. Instead of using a briefcase with a bomb, he simply just held a hand grenade. In addition, one of the big things with the second one too was that his roommate, the man that eventually turned him in, talked about the fact that he, after the D.B. Cooper incident, once it hit national news, was the first time that McCoy actually started bringing up the concept of a hijacking. So, is it that he was boasting about what he had done before and was trying to get accomplices to maybe try and help him in a second one? Or was it that he was simply a sloppy copycat that just happened to fit the criteria to kind of lead him into the suspect ring?
To this day, there's still a lot of people that believe he is a true D.B. Cooper. There's also small little details that we have learned about throughout the years, that the tie that D.B. Cooper was wearing on the plane, he had a similar tie with a similar tie pin.
Yeah, mother of pearl and a J.C. Penney clip-on.
There were several photos of him with that specific tie and pin, and I believe it was his mother they did an interview on. And whenever they brought that up and showed her the picture, she started crying because I guess she believed it was him. Now, another thing with McCoy, before the hijacking, he was hurting for money. I'm not going to say he was broke, but he was hurting for money. And then shortly after the hijacking, or the original hijacking where they believe, or with the D.B. Cooper situation, he was better off with money and actually moved his family to the Carolinas. He also bought new tires for his car and bought several other things that he could not afford before the hijacking.
And it's also interesting to point out the fact that he was originally from Utah.
Yeah.
He was a Mormon. And he didn't leave the church until after returning from fighting in Vietnam. He was actually a war hero. Got a lot of declarations while he was over there.
Yeah.
And I actually have a friend of mine that left the Mormon church, and they tend to go a little sideways once they leave. You gotta have some, if you're brought up in that world, you have to have some real serious things going on with you to walk away.
Yeah. After he had already got caught, he got sentenced to 45 years in a federal penitentiary. He actually escaped prison 2 years after. And he was robbing banks to make money. And he ended up getting shot and killed. To this day, the FBI denies that he is D.B. Cooper, but that is one of the people that I believe is a strong possibility it could be him.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. My only counter to that is a man named Dwayne Weber. So Dwayne Weber is an interesting fellow. So career criminal, multiple aliases. The man, interestingly enough, if you remember from the beginning, we talked about the fact that he filled out everything with a red pen. Yeah. Something that supposedly is used by traveling salesmen. Well, that's what Dwayne Weber was. He was a traveling salesman. He was a shyster. He basically went around and tried to rip people off for their money, selling bunk goods and everything else. So to just have red pens on deck kind of made sense. On top of that, he would constantly make business trips up into the Pacific Northwest, and often, his wife Jo, after his death, through subsequent interviews and everything else, would talk about the fact that they'd be on these road trips driving through that part of Oregon and would just point things out like, oh, right there's where D.B. Cooper walked out of the woods. Or, they'd pull off on the side of the road to little scenic view spots, kind of like we have here in the Blue Ridge Parkway, and leave her alone in the car for hours to go off into the woods. Would come back filthy, but with money. Well, sure. So,
he could have hit it.
Yeah, the man on his deathbed, his last words to his wife were, "I am D.B. Cooper." It's hard to really kind of throw that dart and hit the bullseye on who this could have been.
Yeah. You got anybody else in mind, or is that the only...
That's my strongest contender. I recently watched, there's actually a really good documentary on it. HBO Max has it on there, and it's just called The Hunt for D.B. Cooper. And they bring up a woman that I can't remember her name. It was a transgender woman that was a pilot at a Seattle airfield that supposedly admitted before her death that she was D.B. Cooper, and that the sex change and everything else was to basically help her get away with it. Had a lot of details. Supposedly, confessed to several friends that she worked with, like all the details, like, I did this is what I built the bomb out of, this was how I planned it out, this is how I did this. And it all kind of matches up, but all of this wasn't admitted until decades after it had happened. So anybody could have done the research to figure out all those things and then just make it up.
Yeah. And a big thing about that, if you did something like this, chances are you're not going to be telling all your friends.
No, absolutely not. Again, that HBO documentary has another young woman that claims that it was her uncle because her uncle showed up at the house one day, who was also a career criminal, and happened to show up at the house one day all bloodied up and everything else, talking about, oh, we did it, we got the money, we did the hijacking went well. But that doesn't mean that individual was D.B. Cooper. That could have been somebody that was a business partner that maybe was involved in some way and was just getting some of the money from the hijacking, but wasn't actually D.B. Cooper, him, or, according to HBO, him or herself. So
another person that I think this is the strongest case for me. It's Robert Rackstraw. He began in the National Guard and moved to the Army Reserves, and then switched to the regular Army, where in 1969 he joined the famed 1st Cab Air Mobile Division in Vietnam. During his 7 years in service, Rackstraw climbed through the ranks as private, corporal, sergeant, warrant officer, aviator, and first lieutenant. Basically, whenever he was off duty, he was a shithead. Long story short, he was a con artist, a thief. He even rode around in a stolen commander's Jeep. So
he stole his commander's Jeep. Of all the vehicles to steal, the motherfucker wasn't rolling around. When was this? In the 80s?
I mean, it had to be before 71, so...
Oh, shit. Why the hell wasn't he in a Camaro like a man?
Army Captain Gray Mazel wrote, "Nothing was too audacious for Bob. One time, when flying, he reported he found a machine gun in an elephant And you know how that went.
Right.
He was that kind of person.
Poor Dumbo.
Lieutenant Colonel Ken Overturf was asked if Rackshaw had the skills to pull off this high-flying robbery. And his response was, he has a basic knowledge and experience in parachuting. He appeared to be crazy enough to do it and had nothing to lose by trying. Because he was actually kicked out of the military. And this happened a few months after he was kicked out of the military. He needed money, obviously. And according to the Pentagon records, Rackshaw was compelled to leave his military career in the 7th year because he lied about his combat record, his true Army rank, and faking attendance at 2 universities. He was, in fact, a high school dropout. So pretty much he lied to get into the military.
Yeah, but we've all lied to get into the military.
I mean...
We've all lied.
Yeah.
You know how many guys I went through MEPS with that were like, I got asthma, but shh.
I mean, hell, I had asthma growing up, and I told him I didn't.
Man, when I was going through MEPS, you know how many dudes I had asked me to pee for them, and I was like, how am I supposed to pee for you here? Like, we're in front of 30 eyes. Like, I can't just pee for you, man.
Man, hell, whenever I went through MEPS, they didn't even ask us to piss in a cup.
They didn't ask you?
Nope.
Dude, they did piss and hair for me.
Nope. They just made us stand in a room with our underwear on.
Were you in the big, nice mirrored room?
No, it was just a white room, 4 walls. They call us into the office one at a time. Doctor stick his finger up your ass, make sure you ain't got no hernias, touch on your balls a little.
Fuck that, man. So, look, I went to MEPS in Charlotte, and they put us up. All right, so we go into the room, and we have to strip down to our fucking underwear. So we're standing in there, and the whole thing was mirrored off like a fucking hot yoga class or some shit. And it's cold as hell in there, so we're all just standing cupping our junk, just trying to give it some kind of warmth. Standing there shivering, man, and they come in, and they're like, okay, everybody squat and cough. And it's just like, you really gonna have to squat and cough in a room full of mirrors? Savages.
Rackshaw received parachute training at the U.S. Army Airborne School at Fort Benning, Georgia. In California, he took microwave engineering classes, scuba lessons, and extensive underwater demolition instruction. When at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, he attended Special Force School with the Green Berets, where he learned to fly planes, choppers, halo jump, high altitude, low open command drops.
Man, you're going to get beat up. You just said the Green Berets. That's what goes in a little girl's hair.
Man, I've always said, I say beret half the time, I say berets half the time. It's all the same.
There's a Green Beret somewhere sitting there going, it's not fucking funny, man.
All this is verified. The vet had the unique skills sets that D.B. Cooper was known for. In Vietnam, pilot Rackshaw received 2 distinguished flying crosses, the bronze and silver stars, and 37 air medals. But years later, in unrelated court testimony, he falsely claimed to have earned many more, including 5 Southeast Asia campaign ribbons, only 1 tour of duty, and 5 Purple Hearts, even though he was never wounded, which...
So how did he get the 5 Purple Hearts?
Exactly.
That seems like he kind of knew the doctor.
Yeah.
That was his drinking buddy.
Hell, now they give out Purple Hearts like nothing, man.
Do they really?
Yeah.
You have to get wounded.
Dude, whenever I was in basic training, I had a drill sergeant that had been in 7 different Humvee accidents, or IED accidents.
Yeah.
Just about every time, everybody in the truck had got a Purple Heart but him. So he said if it ever happens again, to him, he's going to take a piece of glass and cut up his arm real good. But anyway, so he's a very decorated veteran, even though he stretched the truth a little on some of it. But he was one of the worst lieutenants that they had seen in a long time coming from his command, because they said he's pretty much a piece of shit. Even in many pictures, you can look up this guy, Robert Rackstraw. So I don't know why I keep saying Rackstraw. Look up a picture of Robert Rackstraw and D.B. Cooper side by side. The resemblance is insane. The only thing people say about him is he looked too young to be D.B. Cooper.
Mid-40s. Well, hell, the lead FBI investigator on the case looked identical to the police sketch for D.B. Cooper, ironically enough.
That'd be the best thing to do if you're the lead investigator
on your own case, right.
So, I mean, that in my opinion, that's the person I think had the biggest possibility of doing it. But as long as it's been going on 50 years, everybody has their own opinion on it. It could be anybody.
Well, here's something else crazy about it, right? Is so the FBI completely botched this entire investigation. Like the investigation itself was one of the most mishandled investigations in aviation history, probably. They collected fingerprints. They collected cigarette butts because the man was a chain smoker, right? Like just to show I did my homework, the dude smoked Raleigh brand cigarettes, right? Which is discontinued. They don't exist anymore. But they collected the cigarette butts, which means they had DNA. They had all kinds of stuff. Cigarette butts, missing. Fingerprints, missing. Every piece of physical evidence that was collected basically is gone. And was gone within months of the start of the investigation. Like, literally nobody involved in this took it seriously.
Yeah.
At least not seriously enough to maintain just a basic level of professionalism that when you think of the FBI, you think like, oh, these guys got their shit together. And I guess in 1971, they fucking didn't. Because how difficult would it be at this point to just take the DNA off these cigarette butts if they still had them and then just run the DNA across all these potential suspects? And you'd know exactly who did it. But, oh, lo and behold, the glorious FBI lost the one thing that would cement it.
A lot of the suspects are dead now, so, I mean, it'd be kind of hard to do it now.
No, you can always pull them up. Look, you can get DNA out of a person's teeth for, like, thousands of years after they die.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the biggest reason why they don't want to bring it back up is because they know the biggest reason that he was never caught was because they suck so bad.
Yeah, exactly. They don't want to admit the fact that they dropped the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge black mark on them, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing I gotta add is just a question, right? So if it was you, if you were the one going up there and you were just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna sit and get hammered and drink bourbon after bourbon, and I'm gonna chain smoke a pack and a half of fucking Raleighs, and then I'm going to jump out of a plane. It stands to reason you might have been somebody that realistically didn't have a lot to lose. You didn't have a lot going for you at the time, right? So all these suspects, ironically enough, are all people that were kind of in dire straits, aside from like a handful. And maybe it wasn't that case, you know? Maybe the whole CIA informant thing, like what if it really was a training exercise? Like, hey, if we plant somebody on this plane, let's fully document exactly what the FAA's response is going to be, local police response is going to be, FBI's response is going to be. Because the CIA was involved in this investigation, but basically claimed, like, nope, not worth our time. But they still had agents on the scene at all times. I mean, what if it really was an inside training operation?
I mean, that is crazy to think about, but honestly, that's probably one of the biggest things that could be possible, because all the training that the CIA goes through, the FBI and all that, if the CIA is wanting to learn how somebody can pull something like this off, the best way is for them to train against it.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, and remember, I brought this up earlier. They scrambled the SR-71A Blackbird not once, but twice. You got to be a top-level government to make that happen. That plane was still technically classified in 1971. Like, we only found out that it got scrambled twice decades and decades later after it was declassified. So, I mean, if they're scrambling a classified plane to look for a dude that ran off with like chump change to the federal government, it was to see if they could even hunt somebody like that down. I genuinely believe that that's probably the case. That the whole thing was a training exercise, essentially.
Yep.
That's why nobody got hurt. That's why the person on the plane, like when they landed to get the money in the first place, D.B. Cooper knew enough to say, go pull all the shades down on the plane so that snipers can't get to me, get everybody off. I'm going to keep just the essential people I need to run. Like, that was organized. That was way more organized than just your run-of-the-mill common criminal.
Exactly. Well, I think that's it for D.B. Cooper.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for joining the Broology podcast. And I think next week we will be hitting on more of the recent UFO documents coming out and some of the past UFO document. Be sure to like us on Facebook. If you got any questions or got a specific topic you want us to do a podcast on, send me an email at broologypodcast@gmail.com. But besides that, have a good one.
Later.